What's up, Buck Dog with Deanie in the Garage. Today we're going to talk about the history of engine performance in the Jeep brand. Those are going to be your factory models that came with that extra little bit of oomph. I can't imagine why I'm possibly thinking about engine performance as it relates to the Jeep brand right now, but for some reason it's been on my mind lately. So I wanted to do a video on the history of factory street performers in the Jeep brand. Now, until recently, those models were few and far between. In fact, the motto of Jeep has always been, I'd rather go anywhere than go fast, right? But the reality of the situation is that engine performance is the reason the Jeep brand even exists. Now, I've done a number of videos on the history of Jeep, so I won't go too deep now. But all the way back in the beginning, 1940, when the US government was contracting a new 4x4 vehicle for use in the impending involvement in World War II, they were dealing with a number of different automotive manufacturers. They narrowed it down to three. You had your Ford Motor Company, Bantam, and you had Willys Overland. All right, now there's a bunch of different gyrations, and Bantam technically designed it, this, that, and the third. I'll leave a link up in the corner to a video if you want that full long form history. It's a great story. It is one of my earlier videos, so the content is great. The delivery leaves a little bit to be desired. Amateur hour. So cut me some slack there, but if you want that story, link up in the corner. But the long and the short of it is this: Willys Overland, and yes, it's Willys, not Willys. It was a guy's name. He was German. Willys Overland won the contract with their Willys Quad, which was the name of their prototype. It later became the Willys MB, which is what we know as the World War II Jeeps. Now, why did the Willys Quad win? It came down to the engine. They came to the table with an overperforming, meaning more than what the US government had asked for, engine, and that essentially blew away the Army brass, and they said, that's the one we want. Here's what happened. Bantam came with like two hamsters on a wheel, completely underpowered, and they knew it just wasn't going to happen. Ford came to the table. The Ford Pygmy, which was the name of Ford's prototype, came with a tractor motor, which was a great, reliable Ford motor in tractors, but it just didn't hold up to the rigors of a military use 4x4 vehicle. Now, what Willys did was they took their L134 car engine. It was a straight 4-cylinder engine, and they beefed it up. And they beefed it up to 55 horsepower, which doesn't sound like a lot, but it actually won over. Now, to put it into context, the Willys Quad, or one of the requirements of this very first 4x4 vehicle, was that it could be picked up. 4 guys, one on each corner, could pick it up. Now, picture 55 horsepower on what sounds to me like a large go-kart. That thing will move. Now, what was even more impressive was that the pistons in the 134 were extremely under square. In fact, the bore was 3 1/4 inches. The stroke was 4 3/4 inches. So what you have is an insanely torquey engine. So that 55 horsepower is actually pushing 105 foot-pounds of torque. Again, on what's essentially a sheet of plywood with 4 wheels on it. So the irony of, for most of Jeep's life, them not having a focus on engine performance, is that without engine performance, they would not have existed at all. Now, 1940, the Jeep brand is born essentially after the war. The 134 goes into basically everything they built. You got the CJ2, which was basically just a prototype, the CJ2A, the CJ3A, the Jeepster, the CJ3D, which is going to be your right-hand drive, 2-wheel drive male Jeeps, and it also went into that iconic Jeep station wagon with the tall split grille. And in that iteration, the L134 was tuned up to 63 horsepower. So an argument could be made that the 1940s Jeep station wagon was the first ever example of a Jeep performance package. Now, the reality is that that station wagon was a heck of a lot heavier than any CJ2A or Willys MB out there, so they had to find some way to beef it up, and so that's what they did. Now, I'm going to take this minute, since we're talking about 1940, we're talking about Jeeps made in Toledo, Ohio. I'm wearing this awesome shirt. It was sent to me by my buddy Brian. I've called him out before. This printer, not a sponsor at all, I just love these shirts, is printed on a Lark. Printed on a Lark. Go find them on Instagram. I guess this guy's from Toledo. All his shirts are Toledo, Ohio related. So some of them don't have to do with Jeeps, but a lot of them do. This is my personal favorite right here. Made in Toledo, the original Jeeps. This Jeep I'm sitting in right here, this 2001 Jeep Grand Cherokee WJ was also made in Toledo. Absolutely love it. Now let's move on. Now, as good as that 134 was, nicknamed the Go Devil engine, so if you ever hear anyone talking about a CJ2A with a Go Devil, they're talking about the L134. It was replaced in 1950 by the F-head Hurricane, and there was no real performance package for a solid, geez, almost 30 years. All right, in 1969, Kaiser now owns Jeep. Willys is out of the picture. In 1969, Kaiser looks around and they look at what all the other automakers are doing. And if you know anything about the automotive industry in 1969, the name of the game was performance. So what Kaiser decides to do is make their own performance version of what they have on hand. Their flagship at the time is the CJ5. It's a vehicle that they built, I think, for 32 years. Might be one of the longest running vehicles to not have the body style changed ever. What they did in 1969 was they came up with the 462. Now, sadly, the 462 is not a 462 cubic inch V8 CJ5. That would be insane. It would be literally like strapping an Estes rocket to a paper airplane. What the 462 stood for was a 4-wheel drive, 6-cylinder, 2-seater, basically just describing the CJ5. The 6-cylinder in question is the GM Dauntless V6. Now, Jeep had been using, or Kaiser had been using this motor for a long time. Had been using it in the CJ5s. It's not unique to this model. It was essentially the top-of-the-line V6. Kaiser didn't make a ton of their own engines, so they sourced the Dauntless from GM. From what I've heard, I've had zero experience working on Dauntlesses, but a very good engine, ran for a long time, used in a lot of vehicles. Now, the key to the 462 was that it had upgraded luxuries to go along with. So it's a top-of-the-line CJ5 with your Dauntless. Then you get a custom dash, extra gauges, custom decals. I think the big key here, though, is the 3-speed with the 488 gearing. So essentially, with your V6 strapped to your teeny tiny light little CJ5 and 488 gearing, that thing probably felt like a rocket ship off the line until about 20 miles an hour when it fell on its face. But this is the first example of what we're going to see later on down the road, where Jeep recognizes that they're not a performance brand. They're not SRT, they're not SVT, they're not GM. So when they make a performance model, they marry it with luxury. And we're going to see this for the most part down the line from here on out. Now, the 462 is an incredibly rare vehicle. They only made it in 1969. And it's the direct predecessor, if you know anything about the CJ Renegades. The Renegade was a high quality, high luxury trim level. There's actually, and when I did my history of Wranglers, I forgot to mention the YJ Renegade, which was supposed to be the same thing. I'm going to put a picture of it here. A couple people mentioned it. It's the most hideous Wrangler you've ever seen. I don't know what they were thinking. But the point is, the Renegade name, which until recently was known to be a luxury version of whatever vehicle it was slapped on, that started with the 462. All right, now after the 462, we get our first real engine performance in a CJ. Here's what happened. 1970, Kaiser sells Jeep to AMC. Now, AMC's first order of business with their newly bought Jeep brand was to streamline it and find some way to save money. And the way they were going to do that was to get rid of all the random engines that Kaiser was using, GM engines and old-ass Kaiser engines, and use the engines that AMC already had in their stable. AMC in 1970 has a full stable of engines that they can use for Jeep, and they start integrating them into Jeeps. And one of the first things they did in 1972 was put their 304, everybody had a 304, 302, a 305 at this time, into the CJ5. Now, that doesn't sound like a big deal, especially when you consider the numbers. 150 horsepower, okay, you know, 2-barrel carb, okay. But when you factor the fact that the CJ5 could be blown away in a light wind, I'll bet those factory CJ5s were blisteringly fast. Just imagine it, 1972, no roll bar, no doors, fresh off the line 304, and you're cranking it with your 3-speed. Those things must have been amazing. Now, they didn't market them as performance packages, but the reality of that situation is it's the first time any Jeep has a power to weight ratio closer to that of a race car. And that's absolutely, I mean, you put a 150 horsepower 304 on a CJ5 and what you have is a race car. It's just really unstable and prone to rollovers, which who doesn't love that? Now moving on down the line and staying with AMC, the next engine that we absolutely have to talk about is the AMC 401. For those across the pond, that's 6.6 liters of fuel being pumped through that bad boy. 401 cubic inches. Oh, the American in me loves it. All right, this engine is special. 10.2 to 1 compression, forged crank and rods. In the early 70s, it's pushing 335 horsepower, 435 pound-feet of torque. And when AMC got a hold of the Jeep brand, they started putting them in J-Series trucks. And more importantly to me, they started putting them in Wagoneers. Can you imagine you're late for soccer practice in 1972? But you got the big 401 under the hood, you ain't gonna be late no more. So if I could get my hands on a Wagoneer from the early 70s with the 401, I wouldn't even care that you get gallons per mile instead of miles per gallon. I don't think I would mind. Now, unfortunately, anybody who knows the story of the automotive history of the automotive industry in the 1970s knows that anything cool in the early 70s was dead and detuned by the late 70s. So by the time the 401 was finally killed off, final model year 1978, it was pushing 195 horsepower and 305 pound-feet of torque. Oh, how the mighty have fallen. Such is the story of the 70s. And with the end of the 401, we're going to leave AMC engines. We're actually going to leapfrog the AMC 360 to start talking about the Chrysler 360. Now, here's a little side note for you. A lot of people think that the AMC 360 that was put in Jeeps is the same, similar, a descendant of the Chrysler 360 that was put in Jeeps. But they're completely different engines. The literal only thing they have in common is that they're engines, they went in Jeeps, and their displacement's the same. Nothing else is similar about them. Completely different engines. Now, little background on the Chrysler 360. What we're actually going to be talking about is the 5.9, right? So the 5.2 and 5.9 liter that Chrysler was using in the 1990s are one chromosome away from the 318 and 360 that Chrysler was using in the 70s and 80s. The difference, the LA block 318 and 360 are carbureted, and they have a gear on the front of their cam for a fuel pump. The 5.2 and 5.9 Magnum blocks are basically the same displacement. We're just talking liters instead of cubic inches, and they have multi-port fuel injection. Why did I tell you this? Is it important to the story? No, I just love talking about Mopar engines. Now, what we are going to talk about, and what is important, and why I'm mentioning all this, is the 1998 Jeep Grand Cherokee ZJ 5.9 liter limited, known affectionately, colloquially, as the Niner. All right, now this vehicle is the very first time performance feels at home on the Jeep brand. What you have is fuel injected, again, 245 horsepower, all-wheel drive horsepower. That's going to be important. 345 horsepower, pound-feet of torque. The interesting thing about the 5.9 is that you don't get a ton more horsepower over the 5.2, but oh, the torque for days. I mean, you'll just burn rubber to bits all you want, and that's exactly what the 5.9 ZJ did. Sadly, only made for 1 year. Its 0 to 60 time was 6.8 seconds. It was the fastest SUV ever at the time, a record that was not broken. It's almost 10 years later when the SRT8 came out in the WK Grand Cherokee. The reason, of course, is that all-wheel drive, and that's going to be the key going forward. We're going to be talking about all-wheel drive horsepower a lot. Now, the beauty of everything about the Niner is beautiful, but something really great about it is that it's 100% unique. Unique wheels, unique grille, unique body moldings, unique interior. And again, you're seeing where Jeep consistently will marry luxury and engine performance. Unfortunately, that usually leads to a really high price, which leads to low production numbers. Every tit has a tat, every this has a that. It's just a fact of the matter. Now, in that same vein, in 2002, Jeep released an upgraded motor to be released alongside their brand new trim level. Here's the background. Let's go back to 1999. The 5.2 and the 5.9 liter Magnums are killed off in favor of the 4.7 liter PowerTech. That's what's in this Jeep that I'm sitting in right now. It's a 4.7 liter V8, naturally aspirated. It's a fine motor. in 2002, they released an updated version of that motor called the HO, the high output, and they change a ton of stuff. The 4.7 HO gets different shaped heads, different shaped pistons, different shaped cams, a forged crank, 3.3 pound heavier injectors, better flowing intake, different valves, floating wrist pins. It's basically as if somebody took, you know, just a tuner guy, a garage monkey, took a 4.7 and built it up. You know what I mean? And the motor delivers. You're looking at 265 horsepower at 330 foot-pounds. That's more than the Niner. Those numbers are better than the Niner in a lighter package. Went into the WJ, and again, they were releasing a brand new, absolute top-of-the-line luxury off-road performance in the Overland, and they wanted to be able to release this new motor alongside it, and it sold like crazy. One of my dream Jeeps is a 2002 Jeep Grand Cherokee WJ Overland with the 4.7 HO. If any of you have one that you'd like to give to me, I have like $33 in my bank account. I would happily give you that $33 for your 2002. You let me know. Email dneoffroad@gmail.com. Now moving on from here, we're going to continue this history of Grand Cherokees and performance. The WK, which is the third generation, runs from 2005 to 2010. In 2005, they released the 6.1 liter Hemi. This thing is an absolute animal. This is the one that was released when I was younger, and I remember just being like, what in the... It's basically a race car, and it's all-wheel drive, so you get to use almost all of that horsepower at launch. The result is, from the 6.1 liter naturally aspirated Hemi, you get 420 horsepower, 0 to 60 in 4.2 seconds. 4.2 seconds. To put that in perspective, at the time in 2005, this Grand Cherokee, this minivan with 4 doors, this soccer mom mobile, was the second fastest vehicle SRT had ever made as far as 0 to 60 time. The only thing faster in the 0 to 60 that SRT had ever had their hands on was the Viper. The only thing faster than the thing getting you to soccer practice was the Viper. Let that sink in for a second. All right, now after the WK, the WK2, that's the current generation. We're in the last year of the current generation of the WK2. And there are a number. You've got 392 models, and you've got this and that. But the one we're going to talk about is the 2018 SRT TrackHawk. Obviously, this thing is an animal. 6.2 liter Hemi, but supercharged. 0 to 60 in 3.3 seconds. There are, I don't need to talk about this one because it's so recent. Everybody knows about this one. There are a million videos. A bunch of YouTubers that are 4 billion times more popular than I did have gotten to drive it, and that is amazing for them. And my favorite of those is James Pumphrey from Donut Media. Long story short, he takes off in this thing and you see his face and then he's like, oh my God, I forgot to breathe. And that's essentially what a 6.2 liter supercharged all-wheel drive minivan, essentially, with 4 doors will do to you. A lifted minivan will do to you. It'll make you forget to breathe, apparently. Thank you, Jeep, for making that happen. Now, moving on from there, the next entrance, and the whole reason for this video today, it's a weird entrance. It's the Wrangler. We're going to talk about a performance Wrangler. The Wrangler Rubicon 392 that is coming to us this year. Now, if you don't know, if you've been living under a rock, 392 is the cubic inches of the 6.4 liter Hemi. I love that Dodge is using cubic inches. I know it's just on that one engine. I know it's a gimmick. It's a gimmick that has worked on this nostalgic redneck. Done and done. So what you're getting in 2021 is a 392 cubic inch V8. It's the first time a V8 was in a Wrangler. And let's be honest, if the Bronco doesn't come back, do we get a 392 Rubicon Wrangler? I don't know. But I don't care, because in this timeline, the Bronco came back and the Wrangler got a 392. They made it on a modified JLU. That's the 4-door, the unlimited Wrangler. They needed to stiffen up the frame to handle the power. They had to beef up the front steering and the front suspension to handle the weight of a 392. This thing goes 0 to 60 in 4.5 seconds. 4.5 seconds in a Wrangler. It's insane. Now, I couldn't find anything that told me is that in 2-wheel drive or 4-wheel drive, but I figured it has to be 4-wheel drive, because in a 6.2 liter Hemi, you're just going to lose too much of that power to wheel spin if you're not in 4-wheel drive. This crazy thing pulls the 1/4 mile in 13 seconds. It's a 13-second car. It's a factory Wrangler. It's insane. This thing comes in 9 colors. You got your boring various shades of white, gray, and black. Then you got Firecracker Red. You got Sarge Green, which is a great name for a great color. You've got Hydro Blue, which I'm a big fan of in a Wrangler. And my personal favorite is Schnozberry Pearl Coat. I'm not sure that Jeep did their homework on this one. The author of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory wrote a bunch of other books where he uses schnozberry, and the meaning is very different than it is in Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. I'm going to leave it there. I don't want to... You guys can do that research on your own. The long and the short of the 392 Wrangler is that it's a long time coming. The Wrangler has existed for almost 35 years without a street performance model. It's always gotten 4 cylinders and 6 cylinders, V6, straight 6s, straight 4s, and I think it's about time. I think it's going to sell like crazy. I'll bet you the guys who would still be buying 6.2 liter Raptors are going to eat these things up. I don't even know who else, but I'll bet you this thing sells like crazy. Certainly in 20 years, it's going to be a sought-after Jeep in the used market. And what I want to say about it is that I feel like the 392 Wrangler is everything that's right about Chrysler right now. Now, I know I'm going to get a ton of pushback on that. Every time I even mention Chrysler or Dodge or Jeep, people bring up, well, they're owned by the Italians and Stellantis and Peugeot and whatever else. Listen, I don't know. I don't care who owns them. All I'm saying is a 392 Wrangler could be designed by Japanese and built on the moon. That's an American vehicle, all right? A 6.4 liter off-roader, that's an American vehicle. That's an all-American vehicle. And I think Chrysler, whoever owns them, is on a good path. This is going to be a hot take, right? Towards back to their roots as a more niche brand. They've always been one of the big three, but let's be honest, they've always been trailing, almost always. And they need to align themselves more the way AMC aligned themselves with Jeep. Hey man, we can't build cars, or we're not gonna build cars that everyone's gonna buy. But there are crazy people out there who still want a solid rear axle. There are crazy people out there who still want high displacement vehicles and Wranglers and crazy stuff like that. Listen, the march of progress is clearly going towards GM with their electric program and Ford taking tiny displacement engines and putting 14 turbos on them to get them to make power. That's clearly where progress is going. I'm not ignorant enough to ignore that. But what I'm saying is there are still people with money that spends that will buy a 392 Wrangler, that will buy a Dodge Challenger Hellcat. And I think that if Chrysler, whoever owns them, I don't want to hear it, if they can align themselves as that niche market willing to give you a supercharged 6.2 liter soccer mobile, then they will survive. And I hope they do. Y'all know I hope they do. That is the end of my story for today. I'd love to know what you guys think about this list. It was difficult to research Jeep performance vehicles. There are forums and entire support groups dedicated to Ford and GM and even Chrysler performance models. But if you want to know about Jeep performance, you really need to dig, and dig I did. So let me know what you think. Which of these would you like to own the most? I can't choose. I'm a 9er fan. Obviously, I want that 02 Overland. A 401, anything sounds amazing, but a Wagoneer would be crazy. I would rock this 392 Wrangler in a minute. My daughter would love it. Her favorite words are "Daddy, go fast," which I'm gonna end up getting a ticket at some point trying to give the kid her little fix of speed. If you like the video, that's just common sense. Subscribe to the channel. Maybe go check out our website. Certainly check out this guy's website. Printed on a Lark. Real cool shirts. If you like Jeep, thank you again to Brian, my buddy, for sending these out to us. Check out our website, monkeywithatoolbox.com. You can buy some of our merch there. We also have lists of like tools we use and stuff. It's a cool website. That's really all there is to it. Leave us a comment down there in the squawk box. As always, thanks for watching.